A nuclear bomb has just dropped on Times Square, New York City. A massive explosion occurs. Buildings are completely destroyed. Millions of people are eviscerated. You've managed to survive the explosion. But what happens next might be even worse. Your body is now full of radiation. This is what if, and here's what would happen. Did you know that a little bit of radiation actually isn't as bad as you think? Yeah, you're constantly bombarded by it. You get radiation from just walking around outside, watching TV. Heck, even eating a banana gives you radiation. But lucky for us, the radiation we receive from these activities is a lot lower than a nuclear bomb. We commonly see radiation measured in two different units, sieverts, or CFV for short, and smaller units called rem. They measure how much radiation was absorbed by a person or an object and the medical effect of that radiation. You probably absorb about 0.62 rem of radiation every year. So how much will the bomb that just dropped in New York produce? Well, let's say you're right in the center, within 1 kilometers, 0.6 meters of where the bomb exploded. You look up and see a blinding flash of light in the sky as the nuke explodes, followed by an immense amount of heat and pressure hitting your body. Your body would be met with an enormous amount of radiation. We're talking anywhere in the range of 300 to 1,000 rem. That's about the same amount of radiation you'd get from eating 30,000, 100,000 bananas. But what happens next? Well, if you were exposed to that amount of radiation, you wouldn't have much time. But if you have a minute now, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Skillshare. While researching this video, I realized how much creative storytelling goes into all these wild scenarios. One skill I've always wanted to improve is crafting realistic 3D environments for videos like this. And thanks to Skillshare, I've started learning how to make that happen. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives, offering thousands of classes taught by industry experts, from film and animation to design, illustration, and productivity. They've got something for everyone. Right now I'm taking Introduction to Cinema 4D, which is helping me master 3D modeling and animation. Imagine creating realistic nuclear explosions or futuristic cityscapes. That's some game-changing material for what-if videos. What's great is how easy it is to learn at your own pace. Their learning paths guide you through curated collections of classes to master a specific skill, step by step. And the best part? Start your creative journey today with Skillshare. Now let's see what happens moments after that nuclear explosion. Maybe you're standing outside in Bryant Park, close to the center of the blast. There, you'd be hit by 800, 1,000 rem and vaporized immediately. But maybe you somehow managed to take cover. You ran into the New York Public Library. It would get destroyed. Glass would shatter and puncture your skin. Fire would be everywhere. Surviving this kind of impact would be virtually impossible. But if you did manage to survive, what happens next? Well, inside of your body, the radiation would be wreaking havoc. It would be like having a nuclear bomb go off inside of your cells and tissues. Within a few hours, you'd have nausea, vomiting, headaches, and a fever. Radiation hitting parts of your body would cause certain neurotransmitters to get released. These would activate systems in the body that make you nauseous and cause you to vomit. Within days to weeks, you'd have a whole load of horrible symptoms, diarrhea being one of them. This is due to your intestinal cells getting damaged from acute radiation syndrome. If this intestinal damage is severe enough, you could die within 10-20 days. Your bone marrow would also be destroyed. No bone marrow means your body can't produce platelets to help your blood clot, which means you start bleeding. For men, stem cells that produce sperm would get injured, causing them to become temporarily sterile. And another symptom that's a lot more obvious. You'd lose your hair due to the roots being severely damaged. If you were near Times Square, where the bomb dropped, there would be at least a 50% chance you'd be dead by now. This is due to bone marrow failure. You'd be bleeding and infected, your immune system shot. And it would be nearly impossible to fight off all these infections let alone the radiation that comes later. But what happens if you were outside the main blast radius? If you happen to be outside of the main blast radius, well, you'd be hit with a much smaller dose of radiation. You'd only get about 10-20 rem, but that doesn't mean things would be much better. It would take anywhere from 2 to 8 years, but eventually you could get leukemia. For people exposed to significant levels of radiation, the chances of getting leukemia are 50% higher than for those who haven't been exposed, but maybe you got lucky. 2 years passed, then 7-8, and no leukemia. Still, your exposure to radiation means your risk of getting cancers will be higher for the rest of your life. For a 100 rem exposure, it's 50% more. And we're not talking just one cancer. This is a higher risk for all cancers: cancer of the stomach, lung, liver, and other parts of your body. You'd also have a higher chance of chronic liver disease, high blood pressure, and heart problems. Is there no hope? Or can people who've been zapped with a large dose of radiation be treated? Well, thankfully, there are some treatment options. First, doctors will try to determine the amount of radiation you've been hit with. How long it takes for someone to vomit tells doctors quite a lot. The quicker you start vomiting, the higher the dose. Frequent blood tests also tell doctors about drops in white blood cell count, which are related to bone marrow damage. Decontamination is the first treatment step. It's done to remove external radioactive particles. Shoes and clothing are taken off, then your skin is washed with soap and water. The next step is treating damage done to the bone marrow. You might be given treatment to help stimulate new white blood cells. Patients with severe damage will be given blood transfusions. Now, depending on the type of radiation you've been hit with, other treatments may be given to help internal organs recover from injury. Now, this is what would happen if you were in the blast radius of a nuclear bomb. But radiation can come from all kinds of places. Let's check out another scenario. On April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine was the site of a massive accident, one that spewed tons of radioactive material out into the atmosphere, 400 times more than the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Now, in terms of bananas, well, it would have been like eating 6 trillion of them. Due to the radiation, 28 nuclear plant workers died within 3 months. About 140 plant workers got acute radiation sickness. If you were one of the 600 workers who survived the initial explosion, well, it was likely you still got a heavy dose of radiation, which over time led to leukemia and other health issues. If you lived further away in the surrounding areas, the wind would have carried radioactive particles to the air you were breathing. But luckily, these populations were relatively safe. Measurements have shown that those radiation levels were no more than the dose of a CT scan. But not everyone was safe. If you happened to drink milk during the time, it was unfortunately flavored with radioactive iodine. Cows near Chernobyl were munching on contaminated grass, and as a result, they were producing radioactive milk. If you happened to drink this stuff, you'd be at a severe risk of thyroid cancer. Naturally, due to high radiation levels, the area around the plant was evacuated, and a 30 kilometers 19 meters exclusion zone was established. A city in this zone, Pripyat, became a ghost town. But what would happen if you were to visit the site today? Is the radiation gone? Completely. Over time, radiation emitted by a radioactive particle decreases. As a particle emits energy, it becomes more stable and gives off less radiation. This is what has happened in Chernobyl. Overall, the area is much safer than it used to be. The level of radiation has decreased enough that you could spend a couple of weeks in the exclusion zone. You'd get about 3 to 4 rem of radiation during this time. Now, if you stayed there a whole year, well, you could get up to 90 rem, which is a lot more dangerous. Even during your 2-week stay, you'd be advised to stay away from the high radiation areas. You wouldn't want to spend a lot of time near the elephant's foot. This is a pile of radioactive material that's melted into the basement of the reactor building. It's composed of a substance called corium, a mixture of melted nuclear fuel and melted reactor. When the accident happened, If you were near the elephant's foot for a mere 5 minutes, the exposure would kill you, even more lethal than the bomb. We dropped on New York. Today, it's still lethally lethal. This mix of radioactive particles, plutonium, and core material gone radioactive is extremely dangerous. And it'll stay this way for decades, maybe even centuries. It's a good thing the entire reactor has been enclosed in a big dome to keep unsuspecting visitors safe. Okay, time for us to check out an otherworldly situation. Okay, ready for your last stop? This time we're traveling forward in time. It's 2042, and you're on a mission to Mars. You're super excited about being on the first human team to the Red Planet. But one thing you're not excited about? The radiation on Mars. Unlike Earth, Mars doesn't have a planetary magnetic field. As a result of this, under the bombardment of intense solar winds, Mars lost its atmosphere. Now, both these factors mean that radiation levels on Mars are 40 to 50 times higher than on Earth. Right now, we don't fully understand the effects that radiation in space can have on the human body. That's because we don't have data on prolonged radiation exposure in space. Based on what we've seen on Earth, if you're exposed to long-term higher radiation, on Mars, well, that would lead to you getting acute radiation sickness. At an exposure of 10 rem or more, your risk of cancer goes up. You'll have genetic damage as the radiation causes your cells to mutate. Radiation will make you age faster, and you'll probably die sooner. Now, speaking of death, there's one thing that's particularly dangerous for you on Mars. Every 11 years, the sun reaches something that's known as a solar maximum. This is when the sun sends out solar flares and coronal mass ejections much more frequently. At this point, you'll be dealing with even more radiation on the Red Planet. It would be like being hit with 3,000 rem or 300,000 bananas. Basically, you'd be dead, especially without the proper protection.